It's our very first What is Mind interview, and my guest is Richard Yonck. Richard is a futurist. He is the author of two books about technology, Heart of the Machine and Future Minds. His latest work is a sci-fi novel called Mindstock, which will be released in September of 2025. Richard, welcome.
Wonderful to be here, Will. It's great to be your kickoff guest. So really
Yes.
looking forward to today's conversation.
And we have something in common. We're both living the expat life. You're in Prague today, and I'm in Buenos Aires.
Indeed, and it wasn't all that long ago I was in Buenos Aires with you. So yeah, it's definitely been an interesting period in life.
Let's start here. What is a futurist?
Sure, great starting point. Great question. Uh, a futurist is basically someone who explores different possibilities for how the world may or may not develop according to various trends, observations, different understandings of how things tend to develop in the world and geopolitically and otherwise. That's a semi-general, formal uh, description, but let's just clarify. There are many different people calling themselves futurists of all sorts. There are
Hmm.
people who literally have degrees in the field, people who have worked with major corporations, Fortune 500s, in this realm. And of course, there are pop futurists who are out there, exploring it with audiences and others and books. But at a certain level, I'll try not to go on too long, but at a certain level, the human beings, all are futurists. All of us
Right.
are. If you look at it from a standpoint of our unique niche in the world as a species, we actually routinely explore the future to greater and lesser degrees, more and less formal ways, every single one of us. So it's actually
It feels
worth
like,
saying that. I'm sorry.
no, it feels like the term has something generalist built into it, right? Because if you were a specialist in one field, you'd have to think about what the future was in that field, but you're kind of blending the disciplines together a little bit. Would that be right?
I think that's safe to say. There are certainly people who focus in particular areas, including myself, because you can't there are the world and the subjects that we deal with are far too broad, far too many to not kind of focus in a particular area. But the reality is, you're right. You need to approach it from a generalist standpoint at a certain level in order to be able to bring in the many different um, factors to that can play into the development of different aspects of how the future manifests.
The first time I heard the term futurist was when Future Shock by Alvin Toffler came out in the 70s. For people that weren't alive then, Future Shock was a nonfiction book that had a huge worldwide impact. I'd compare it to Sapiens today. And the thesis of this book was that as the future rushes towards us, we start feeling something comparable to the culture shock you get when you fly to a different country. I have to say, I didn't feel the future shock then. I do now. How do you think future shock held up?
I remember reading it and seeing a documentary about it in junior high school when it came out. So that dates me right there. And it was it was compelling. It very much made an impact on me at that time, and has continued to throughout the years and decades. The fact that the thing that I took away from it primarily, that I agree, I didn't feel like it impacted me the way that he was describing Toffler at that time, but the fact is that when the world continues to change on a regular basis, and that change especially when it accelerates over time, we tend to experience a range of different forms of anxiety and dissociation because the things we like stability as an animal. We do like
Yeah, yeah.
stability, and most creatures do. So it had a big impact and continues to do so. I actually was invited to participate a couple of years ago in a volume which was Aftershock, which was the 50th anniversary of Future Shock, and it brought together a lot of different futurists writing about both Toffler, but also the different aspects of how the world is changing today.
How did you become interested in technology and the future?
I was literally, as soon as I could read, my mother would take me to the library. It felt like a few times a week, and I devoured what at the time was if you followed since libraries of that type were due decimal, the 500 and 600 series books, basically basic science and applied science, and and biographies as well, and just was fascinated with how all of this developed. In the course of doing that, one of the things that soon became apparent to me was this idea that a lot of these inventions, more of them, many of the primary ones seem to have been invented much more recently. And, that it plays along with some of the accelerationist mentalities of and theories of today. But as a teen, I kind of came around to thinking, oh, I'll bet that they're just cherry picking. That, I'm
Mm.
sure that they just were, paying more attention to the current times and so forth. But in fact, in later years, came to find out that, in fact, a good many people were making a good argument for the idea that technology and change and progress do accelerate over time.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And that's funny because it was flat for so long, right? And then all of a sudden, this started on this upward curve.
Well, I mean, I think that's the nature of exponential time and exponential
Yeah.
change. It wasn't flat. It was following very much a similar progression, but if you think of how time changes exponentially, then it's not necessarily apparent on human scales, and then it becomes apparent, and then it becomes, oh shoot, it's way more than I can handle, which is kind of where a lot of us are finding ourselves today. So the fact is that these changes we do manage to figure out how to deal with them, but they do bring a lot of turmoil along with them.
One thing I know you thought a lot about is the emotional interaction between machines and people. I know ChatGPT is very impressed with the questions I ask. It has that capability. How would you judge the state of the art of emotion simulating machines, emotion reading machines?
Hmm. So a big question. A decade ago, I wrote about the progression and history of artificial emotional intelligence, or emotion AI, in a book called Heart of the Machine. And the concept here is that people were developing since the mid 90s and onward systems that could read, interpret, and interact with human emotions. There are a number of issues with that. You get into, privacy issues. You get into, the systems only being so bright, so intelligent for being able to deal with this. As we move into today, much of what we're seeing, I would not consider to be it interacts with our emotions, but it doesn't necessarily understand them in any significant way. So, and that's fair enough. I mean, it's going to be quite a while. It's going to be a good many decades, if not longer, before these systems can actually process and comprehend in any significant way what emotion is or what it means to us, much less experience it itself. Um, but the thing is that with emotion, we tend to project a lot. So the problems with ChatGPT, with other kinds of uh, models that are out there today, go all the way back to the mid 60s and Eliza, a chatbot that was developed back then, and many others as well, where essentially there's no there's no comprehension, but we fill in the blanks. We tend to believe that, because something is communicating with us in a certain way and there's a certain level of perceived intelligence, that it must have agency, it must have consciousness, it must potentially be sentient. And these all are probably misguided at this stage in time.
What do you mean that that the efforts are misguided, or that our interpretation is
Hmm,
misguided?
hmm. Sorry if I wasn't clear. Okay, so for throughout history, we ascribe agency and even personhood to a lot of things in our world, simply based on kind of a part of it is evolutionary. There's a benefit
Hmm.
to recognizing or believing that certain things in your world have agency, whether or not they do, because it promotes your survivability as an individual and therefore as a species. We carry that on so that, we've got people in this world who, fall in love with dolls or with inanimate objects or their guns or their cars, and they name them and they treat them as if they were actual beings. And this is kind of a little bit like that. Now, if we expand it to ChatGPT, this is just I see um, something like ChatGPT and a number of the other models as, rather than being a form of true novel artificial intelligence, I tend to see it as a form of a new way of handling data management. The fact is that we have been pouring our knowledge for 30 years or more onto the internet collectively. There's a lot of terabytes out there that we have just filled it all in, and these models have been based on a lot of that information, a lot of that data. So he uses various statistical methods, fires that back at us when we ask a question or engage it in a conversation. And lo and behold, it sounds incredibly human. It sounds like something a person would say. And in
Yeah.
fact, if depending on the model, it might sound like something you would say. So this is a trick at a certain level. It's not sentience, it's the internet being reflected back on ourselves.
Yeah. And our theory of mind interpreting it as it comes to us.
Absolutely.
Okay. Um, Tell me, might machines actually have something functionally similar to emotions?
Do you mean ever or right now?
I guess well, ever. Obviously, it's not happening right now, real emotion, but I wonder whether it's just inherently, emotion is just inherently something that comes with the organism, as opposed to something that is part of, neurons.
So I spent a fair bit of time exploring this in that first book, Heart of the Machine, not just looking at it in terms of what happens with emotion in relation to a device or a machine, but how it relates to our own existence, how we came to develop and evolve to be the creatures, the species we are. And emotion's a core aspect of that.
Mm,
Emotion came about initially, in my mind, and based on research that I've done, a lot of it based on our endocrine system, the most essential and basic emotions being driven by anger, hunger, need for flight or fight, sadness, grief, things that where our interpretation of the world is being modified by our own biology.
mm,
Now, these systems don't have a biology. They aren't embodied at this stage, and they don't have what would essentially be a biochemical form of feedback loops that would drive any of this. So let's just start from there.
Mhm.
We know that many of our uh, emotions are much more um, they are much more than just a chemical response. We can literally think about different things, some experience of our past or something we anticipate in the future, and experience an emotional feeling, an emotional rush in response to that. That tells me that our our minds, our brains come into play as well. Not just this is not just a physiological response, but that said, where does any of this come into play with systems, machines, large language models, what have you, um, that literally don't have a contextual understanding yet of their circumstances? So it's a very big question, and we
Yeah,
can go on a long time
yeah, yeah.
around it. I'm happy to talk about it further, but I don't want to derail the conversation either.
No, sure, sure. Just to give you my take
Please.
on it, I feel like emotion is just such a complicated phenomena. It has the communicative aspect, right? It may be some way of mediating between the modules of the mind. Um, I noticed in your book and in my book, we cite the research by Antonio Damasio that emotions actually help us make decisions. And then you
Hmm.
have the fight or flight response that you talked about, which is this interaction of the body through the nervous system. There's so many things, and it feels like if you were designing a computer, for most of those things, you wouldn't need to design something like emotion. The only thing you would need to design something like emotion would be the communicative aspect with human beings, right? And in your book, you write a little bit about that, and I don't think the state of the art. Maybe you'll correct me if I'm wrong, but I don't think the state of the art has advanced all that much as the simulations of emotion. But the emotion reading hasn't really gotten too much further. Do you
No,
do you agree?
I do agree. Um, in my mind, there's a lot of further advancement in terms of AI itself, uh, that where it moves into a much deeper contextual understanding of the world that may or may not require some level of embodiment in order to allow it to explore the world. Um, but in my mind, you had brought up theory of mind earlier. In my mind, that is a key aspect of how we interpret emotion. If all we're doing is going off of certain verbal, visual, non-spoken forms of communication to understand or to anticipate how a person is feeling, we're we have to go through a whole lot of other context that applies to theory of mind, what we know about each other, what we know about the context of the world we live in, the rooms that we are standing in, all the different things going on around us. So that requires that these models or these AIs be far more advanced than they are today to be able to eventually get to something that's a simulation, at least, of theory of mind in order to do more than simply label a few expressions on a face as being, a particular emotion. We all know a person can smile and not necessarily be happy. So
Mm.
it's an important distinction in my mind.
Okay, great. Um, and when we talk about AIs and uh, getting these human-like qualities or even simulating these human-like qualities, you kind of come to that question of when do AIs start deserving ethical consideration? Do
Mhm.
you think they ever will deserve ethical consideration? What's your thoughts about that?
I think it's really complex, and I think it is a great question. We have already had a number of different people, organizations, even I think a few law cases where there's been an effort to try to recognize, AI of different sorts as having enough agency that of being that it warrants allowing it certain rights or certain capabilities. We know of, there have been numerous efforts to allow AI to copyright, to be considered a creator in a work and so forth. Um, I personally think that we have to get to a point where there's actually enough consciousness, enough sentience that it warrants it in order to actually say, oh, we need to formalize this. But it gets, I think, more complex than that because we are part of this loop. We're part of this interaction. We're not just saying the AI has something. We are actually part of this relationship. When we interact with anything else in this world, especially something where we're interacting in a way that is like human communication, and we're short circuiting or eliminating certain rituals, niceties, uh, basics of culture, uh, it may be that we're diminishing our own other relationships in our lives and in our world. An example I think about recently, Sam Altman had made a statement not that long ago, head of OpenAI, where he said, "Yeah, please, don't be saying please and thank you to the AI. You're basically burning up energy and burning up the planet." It's like, well, we got much bigger problems, first of all, in that regard, in terms of what these systems are doing. But the fact is that when we start saying, well, wait, that's how we interact with people. And we're saying these are entities that we're trying to interact like that. Are we going to carry some of that over to our own other relationships, these alterations in our behaviors, in our interactions with these machines that might be to the detriment of our humanity?
Right. And what what I find very interesting about this practice, which I sometimes do of thanking the AI for what the AI has done, is there's a certain element of what do you call that? The I believe in God, just in case. Pascal's wager, I think it's called.
Okay.
It's kind of, if the AIs do take over, I just want them to know that I'm a nice person. It's
You,
there's that
you
kind of
know,
element to it.
absolutely. That was very much part of some of the thinking around trying to figure out how are we going to get AI to align with our with human values in order to
Yep.
protect ourselves in the event at the point that some people believe, as majority of Silicon Valley, I think at times believe, that AGI is imminent or AGI is right around the corner. Artificial general intelligence, artificial super intelligence, the idea that these systems will somehow reach a point where they are capable of far more intelligence, far more power than one or all humans in the world, would be a very very big problem if it isn't thinking and aligning itself exactly with human values. So one argument has been treat it, golden rule, basically treat it as you would want it to treat you.
Yeah.
There may be something to that. There may be something to that thinking, but I think we're so far away from it that I'm not exactly thinking, yeah, that's our rationale right now.
Right. Well, let's talk about your novel. I read it. I enjoyed it immensely. How would you describe what Mindstock is about?
Thank you. Well, thanks for reading it and for enjoying it. Always love that with readers. Mindstock is a near future dystopia. Takes place several decades from now, but in the aftermath of a massive, devastating cyber attack that wipes out much of the world's knowledge, that takes place probably 5 years from now. Uh, so further down the road in the later in the century, we're following a number of different realities in this world, a world that is very much a post-truth world that is just absolutely inundated with disinformation, deep fakes, various forms of fraudulent and toxic interaction between people trying to manipulate uh, their world and their lives. This is a path I'm concerned that we're on. I'm not trying to predict the future with this, as most people will tell you. That is not the job of science fiction, but occasionally it is useful to explore the world we do not want to live in as well. So I had a great deal of fun doing that with this book, building out a world and developing some very, for me, enjoyable characters who, uh, to my mind, give the story quite a bit of depth.
I agree. It's interesting that we've talked about emotions and machines because I think the most fascinating character in the novel for me is a robot called D2, who has a meta awareness but no emotions. Why do you think it is that characters like Spock and your D2 are so fascinating to us?
Um, well, I don't want to do too many spoilers, and effectively D2 is an AI, not an embodied robot. But the reason I think is that we like to explore the this very, very challenging aspect of our own selves. We know different aspects of our world. We understand, systems that interact with knowledge, data, and so forth. When we get to the point of emotion, it's actually a great deal of mystery. There was pioneer of AI many years, decades ago, Marvin Minsky coined the term suitcase word, in which he used this to refer to a number of uh, words: intelligence, consciousness, even emotion, that because in so many respects, the words come to mean different things depending on who's using it and what the context is. In other words, there's not a hard and fast definition of any of them. So it's, in my mind, an area that is worth exploring just because, above all, we are emotional creatures.
Just to talk about my reaction to D2, it feels like when there's a blank slate, you're almost and I guess this goes back to theory of mind, you almost fill it in. I think in this blankness of emotion, you almost put your feelings into it. It's a little bit like seeing a character um, on a stage in the theater with a mask. It's covering up the face, but just the fact that it is a blank slate like makes you project your feelings onto him. So
Interesting.
for me, that tension is what makes that character so
Hmm.
interesting.
That, that's really interesting and enlightening. I see exactly what you're saying. I think there is something to be said for that, that we do want to ascribe human emotion in places where we believe it belongs. And the fact is that that was, in many respects, some of the more challenging aspect of writing this book, that character, because uh, we tend to want to anthropomorphize. We tend to want to, have it respond in ways that a person would, and that's not how it should be. Not at least given where that technology is and where our current technology is. If I don't know if you're familiar with the movie Ex Machina from about 10 years ago, I think, uh, in which a uh, person is brought in by a multi-billionaire who's developed an AI robot to try and basically ha- ha- give it a Turing test, or what amounts to a Turing test. Try to, see if it is sentient, or actually has theory of mind and so forth. And the audience, I've found, tends to see that robot character as very much as a person, as being, warranting an uh, treatment, as if it was another human being. And the fact is that when you go back and watch it multiple times, believe and I feel that, in fact, for most of us, we're actually projecting that onto it, even though it isn't warranted.
I agree. I think that's on the money. How did you come to this decision to write fiction after having written nonfiction books? And do you think you'll continue on the fiction path?
Uh, Great question. As a futurist, one of the things that is very important to me is to be able to properly explore how things can develop, not necessarily how they will, as I say. And the fact is that at a certain point, especially given how rapidly the world changes, as we were saying earlier, and how that is accelerating, uh, writing about certain technologies is differently challenging today than it was 10 years, 20 years, 30 years ago. The pace of change, the pace of publication, and so forth make that very difficult. Writing fiction is something I've always wanted to do. I enjoy it immensely. And to answer your question, this is, in fact, the first part. Mindstock is the first part in a 4-part series. So I am on book 2 right now, and the first book is out uh, for sale on September 16th, and I'm just so excited to have it out there in the world and have many people read it, including yourself, and to hear back about it.
That's good news that there will be more of this world. It's an interesting world. Um,
Thank you.
it feels like imagination is an important tool in thinking about the future, more so than other subjects. Writers like Jules Verne or Isaac Asimov, or even a movie like Her, have prodded us into thinking about future issues. Right? How do you see the role of imagination in in our cultural conversation?
Well, imagination is absolutely essential to us as a species. I believe that what we call imagination is really an exploration of a particular domain, whether that is defined as a particular project, a particular uh, view of the world, uh, developing philosophies, what have you. All of these are a function of, okay, we have a question, we have some different aspects, some different facts here. What can we do with this? Should we do something? Should we do something different? The nature of the Hegelian dialectic is thesis, synthesis, sorry, thesis, antithesis, synthesis. And that is, in some respects, what creativity is exploring and going through a range of possibilities as you create something new. I do think that we are all creative very much at a range of levels, not least our ability to project ourselves into the future and think about and anticipate what we want to have happen, whether that is getting into a college, having a particular job, retiring in a particular place. When we imagine ourselves in the future, that is a form of creation in many respects.
Well, Richard, it's been a pleasure having you. Best of luck on your book.
Okay. Thank you so much, Will. It's been a real pleasure being here, and I wish you lots of luck with your ongoing series.
Okay, hope to see you down here in Buenos Aires soon.
Absolutely. All right. Be well.